Good morning, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I do apologize. I know it's been a couple of days since our last weather discussion. I've tried to keep things updated in the Weather Rogue Discord channel nonetheless. However, I have been out on the road these last couple of days. I am in the process of moving once again. I feel like I'm a traveling salesman without the salesman title. I really do. I'm switching between sort of living right now, so I will be getting settled in over the next week, so if my videos are a little bit more sporadic and uploading, you know why. We should get back on a more routine schedule here after the first week of September, so coming off of Labor Day. But like I said, I will try to keep the Discord channel updated nonetheless. It just won't be video content every other day. It may just be a longer post that I've done, and some information that is relevant to the upcoming patterns and tropics, etc. So let's start first though with College DuPage. This is a map that you guys have become accustomed to now because I use this a lot. This is really important because we want to get a full picture of what's happening here in the United States this morning. And if we take a look, these red lines are indicative of our jet stream. And there's a couple things to mention here that I think are really important before we dive into some of the information today. I do want to also say today we are going to be talking about CDD, HDD for the upcoming next couple of weeks and really both short and long term. And we'll also be giving an update on the tropics because even though Atlantic activity has been relatively quiet, we are seeing quite a bit of activity in the Pacific that could actually have implications for the state of Hawaii. So I'll brief you guys on that here a little bit later on. But let's start first with our jet stream, as we just mentioned. And as I also said before, there's a couple things going on here. The first one is this high pressure that we've been talking about continues to sit over the south central United States. As it does so, we have excessive heat warnings for some parts of the Red River Valley, and if I'm not mistaken, also some of the Gulf Coast states. We are going to be seeing some heat indices well into the 100s over these next couple of days. The heat, though, not everybody's feeling it. So, for example, if we look towards the Pacific Northwest, we have an area of low pressure that is currently off the coast of Oregon and Washington that is now currently moving onshore. As it does so, we expect some below normal temperatures to impact the Pacific Northwest because remember, low pressures are associated with colder air, especially as this low originates from the poles, right? So this is going to bring some cooler temperatures, and especially for higher elevations of Idaho, even back towards Wyoming and Montana, could even see some snowfall, some minor accumulations at some of those higher elevations. We're talking mostly above, say, 5,000 to 7,000 feet. So nothing to write home about, but interesting nonetheless. I mean, we are in late August, and we may see our first snowfall for some of these areas across the northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. Meanwhile, to the other coast, the Northeast and New England, we see an area of low pressure similar to that is currently off the coast of the Pacific Northwest that is moving through Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire this morning. And that's bringing some areas of showers for folks in the area. But it also, similar to that of the system on the West Coast, is bringing some cooler temperatures to the far northern reaches of New England, even getting down towards New England and, the Northeast, I should say. I was meant to say Long Island, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York are seeing some below normal temperatures this morning. And if we take a look at some of those temperatures as of what would be 8, 9 a.m. Central, you can see here, for example, let me pull up the station plots. Yeah, look at that, guys. Let's take a look over at the Northeast, just kind of as a good sort of pretense to the cooler air. And as you see, this morning we had some lows in the mid-50s in some spots, so a little bit on the cooler side. But we do see temperatures this morning and afternoon starting to warm up into the 70s. Now, the sun is still rising in the Northeast at the time of this video, so we're likely to see those temperatures rise continuously throughout the day, possibly getting up into the high 70s and low 80s. So the cooler air is rather temporary, but it's something that we do have to mention because there are some spots, as we just saw, that are dealing with some of these cooler temperatures, but at least as of now, that cooler air is rather temporary. And of course, as a final note, an honorable mention, you do have some shower and thunderstorm activity moving its way across central Minnesota and even some back towards the Central Plains into Kansas City. So we really, for the most part, have a mixed bag of weather this morning. It's not all cohesive and consistent. It just really depends on where you're at. And that is certainly reflective in the short and long range forecast that we have here on Wxrogue. I highly recommend that you guys check out this page, and if you have any questions, feel free to let me know on any of these charts that are displayed here. One thing I would like to mention, this here is our populated weighting cooling degree days by EIA region, and as I've mentioned before, this is just using the GFS. This is just one solution of that. And one thing that I'm going to note here in a moment, and what you'll see, the GFS does tend to have a cold bias. That is especially true when it's plotting both cooling and heating degree days. Again, you'll see that here in just a moment. But if we look ahead here over the next few days, this is our latest run from the GFS, you see that once again the west-south central is on the warmer side, at least temporarily, before we see a decrease in some of those cooling degree days by the time we get to the 29th. And that is the same for every single region. We see this dip here, and I want to make something clear on this dip, because you notice that this is for every single region towards the end of the run that you're seeing that decrease in CDD. I have noticed with our GFS runs, and I have to look into this, but I've noticed that there's sometimes where it will drop off like that. And I don't really believe that that is indicative of the pattern itself. So for example, we see the west-south central decreasing its CDDs over time, and then if you look towards the 29th, we go from 14 to 10, or excuse me, 16 cooling degree days populated weighted to 10. That seems like a pretty substantial drop. That's not to say that, you know, these drops can't happen, but the fact that it shows it for every single region, and then also looking at the model output, it seems way too dramatic of a drop. So I just want to make that clear here. These models are subject to error, and these things can happen. And I will tell you that it seems as though the 29th, at least for this run that you're looking at, seems kind of junky. So I would personally toss that value and more so focus on the 23rd to at least the 28th, because that gives you more of a general trend here. Especially true with the Pacific, because notice how we actually decrease our CDDs with that incoming low pressure system, but then we have a sudden increase, and that has a lot to do with that high pressure we just looked at expanding eventually into the Pacific Northwest by the time that system moves out of the area over these next 24 to 48 hours. The same issue can be said about this chart. This is our cooling degree days for top 5 populated cities. Once again, you see a very dramatic drop here in places for every single city in the region. So this is clearly not a correct value. Again, something that I'm going to have to look into, because it doesn't happen all the time, but I have noticed it on a few runs. So, and I also noticed it when we were originally building this out. So I'm going to have to play around with it and see what's going on with that. But these values prior to the 29th are indicative of the current pattern and what we would forecast for. And then these maps here too, right? 6 to 10 day, 8 to 14, 3 to 4 weeks. I want to just make sure we're all on the same page with these maps, because it's really important about what this means. So for example, 6 to 10 days, we're expecting a higher probability of colder than normal temperatures in the Pacific Northwest. That makes a whole lot of sense, because we have a big low pressure that's out there that's now moving on shore, and it's going to bring some cooler than normal temperatures, and as I said, even some snowfall at some of those higher elevations. So there's higher probability of some of that cooler air, but that being said, we have an area of high pressure that's going to eventually build out into the lower Great Lakes and even some parts of the southeastern United States by the time we get to the rest of this week and into the weekend. So that's something I wanted to show. So this is showing above high probabilities of above normal temperatures. The blue is showing higher probability of below normal temperatures. So this is probability based. It's not necessarily saying it's going to be really, really, really hot. It's just saying that it's going to have a higher probability of above normal temperatures, and this is below normal. So you may see these colors and think, oh, well, that just means it's going to be really, really hot. No, it means that there's a higher probability of heat, and corresponding with the brighter red, and in this case, it is a higher probability of below normal temperatures. If we look towards the 8 to 14, we see some of those cooler air or cooler temperatures moving into the upper Midwest, still associated with that low pressure we talked about off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. Meanwhile, the heat remains for much of the south central United States and the southeast, with some relatively modest probabilities of heat for the Pacific Northwest and far reaches in New England that have been dealing with some cooler temperatures just in the last couple of days. Certainly a rebound for those areas and a continuation of the cooler air for the Central Plains. If we look ahead towards the 3 to 4, again, this is mostly just a trend of heat. And as we've talked about, this is something that really does not surprise me. We are in a transitional pattern right now between now El Nino working out of that to more of a neutral pattern. A lot of our climate models have shown more of this zonal flow taking shape. And of course, there's going to be some fluctuation there if that was to verify. But the overall model suite that we have available to us does not paint a really cold picture into fall. As a matter of fact, it keeps the heat around for longer. And instead, we see winter settle in and correlate with when La Nina is expected to build in, which would be more so December, January, February. And that's been something that we talked about. If you want more information on that, you could check out the live stream from last week where I did talk about why that's the case, or really kind of dive deeper into what we expect for the winter season. Now, I am going to hold off on the tropics for a second because I do want to dive into some of those models for temperature and show you exactly what we're looking at. And one of the things I like to use are ensembles, because ensembles are not one singular solution. They are essentially a blend of a couple dozen, and it gives you more of a confidence interval on the pattern. So as you see, according to the GEFS, you see an area of high pressure that is out here towards the Red River Valley in the south central United States. We have two trough axes, one being in the northeast, the other one the Pacific Northwest, which we just observed on the COD website. Remember, troughs are associated with low pressure, so that tends to bring some cooler air into these said regions. And by the way, this map you're looking at here is once again our 500 millibar jet map. By the way, another thing I just made a little error on, this is what we just looked at just now. That's the last couple of days. So if we actually fast forward to now, there we go. So we see those troughs in New England move off towards the east. We have some troughing out towards the northern Rockies. But meanwhile, that heat actually expands into the Midwest and even some parts of the southeast. So this is the next areas that are going to be above normals. We've seen some cooler temperatures for the Midwest over this last week, but we're expecting a flip back to more summer-like temperatures. Could see even some highs in the lower Great Lakes and even parts of Missouri above 90 at times. So the heat is certainly on for these areas by the time we get to what would be the Sunday time frame. So this Sunday, and as we head into early next week, take a look at that. It looks like the GEFS wants a little bit more of that zonal pattern. Now, this would keep temperatures relatively mild for a large swath of the country. This is exactly what we saw on the climate models last week that is now showing up in more of our sort of medium range models like the GEFS and the Euro, which we'll take a look at here in a moment. But this is significant because the only troughing that we see is up towards the northern United States. And as we know from our population weights, these are not very populated areas with the exceptions of, say, Green Bay and Minneapolis. And even in some cases Duluth, right, depending on their population. But overall, you get the point. It's not a very populated area up in the far upper Midwest region. And for the rest of the country, that is more of our population density centers. We see certainly some more milder and warmer temperatures as we head into what would be later on next week, the middle to late next week. And of course, our model guidance in this case does not a very good job at resolving that far out, but still continues to show a little bit of some zonal, but this would signal more of a high pressure out in the four corners once again, and maybe a return to some cooler temperatures. But we'll have to see about that because I'm not very bullish on cool air dominating the fall right now. It's very much trending towards a continuation of heat, both from a climatological perspective and also from just sort of a short to medium range point of view. Let's look at the temperature anomalies before we hop over to the Euro on this. So we'll take a look here at 2 meter temperature anomalies during this time. And so we'll head back, look at all of this cooler air, right? That was especially over these next couple days, very temporary. However, if you look ahead to what would be the 24th, the 25th, the 26th, you see this heat rebound for a large swath of the country. You do see some below normal temperatures towards Texas. And the reason why that is for places like Houston and San Antonio is because that high pressure is going to disperse a lot of the heat as opposed to being concentrated over one spot. So sometimes you can get some cooler than normal temperatures out of that. But for the most part, we are going to continue to be above normal. And that would take us into the 28th of August. We see another little cold shot by the time we get to what would be Saturday with some of those colder than normal temperatures. But you see, once again, that heat build back. That's certainly showing up here. And we'll actually sort of encompass this on our 5-day averages. I think this is a better sort of perspective on that as opposed to the day-to-day. And look at that. If you go through each individual day, that cooler air does not last very long because long-range models do show that getting kicked out once again. And some of that warmer air out towards the west coast by the time we get to the first week of September, eventually building back north there as well. Before I get to the tropics, one last thing, because I almost forgot to do this for you guys, is I meant to show you on Discord the weather maps that I had posted from yesterday. So this is our Euro and GFS output. Remember at the beginning of the video, I just talked earlier about the output of these. Notice how the 29th drops off for some of these regions and then also these cities. And I mentioned to you that the 29th, at least in this output, is kind of junk. Well, if we look here at this output, which would have been last night's model runs, take a look, for example, at the European model, right? This is plotting our HDD and CDD. This is more relevant to what we're looking at, right? So this is doing about a 5 to 7 day loop here. And as you can see, we do have some cooling. We have that heat expands, so our CDDs would certainly increase across the plains as that high pressure expands north and east by the time we get to what would be early next week. And you see that continue, but then followed by a cold front that moves through the region. So this map is actually more indicative of sort of the cooling. But as I look at this, yeah, see, that's the thing. The map, the output that I show on Wxrogue, it looks like that's not very accurate, the 29th output. However, what I just saw on the Euro and what I'm about to see on the GFS is you do see a decrease for those areas by the 29th, but it still doesn't make sense because look at the South Central United States, right? Those values are still relatively high. You're talking, in that case, about, let's just go back here, if I can pause it. You're talking about CDD values still between 20 to 25 for places like Dallas. And even still, up towards the Midwest, you're talking about like 5 to 10. So, that, like I said, I'm not going to keep harping on that, but there are some times on these runs with Wxrogue, that last day in our time delta, that does spit out inaccurate sometimes. I have to look into that and see what's going on. But I am going to be posting these maps, though, pretty frequently in the meantime. I would highly suggest if something doesn't look right, like if that shows up again on the chart as I'm looking through it, look at these graphics, and these will tell you a much better tale of what's going on as opposed to that. That's why I'm doing both. Not just because I want to have a differentiator between the two with the visual and then the chart, but also because as I'm testing this out, I want to see if the numbers make sense. Because I can give you guys data, right? I can give you this website of Wxrogue, and I can show you, let me go back here. I can show you this chart, right? And just say, hey, here you go. But the important thing, especially as we're talking about data, you got to make sure that the data makes sense, right? Sometimes you can have garbage in, garbage out. In this case, like I mentioned already, it seems as though that last day is garbage in, garbage out. So I'll look into that. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. We'll have to see what's going on with that. That can happen with models. Models are not perfect, and they are subject to error. So if you ever see something that does not look right on here and I don't see it, feel free to message me on Discord and let me know, and I will look into it and see what's going on the back end. So that is it for the temperature conversation, but there's one more thing that we do have to talk about, and that is the tropics. So at the moment, we do have Hurricane Gilma. I don't know if anybody's really talking about Gilma. Personally, I would understand because this is out in the 17th north latitude of the Pacific Ocean, right? And it's moving relatively slow, but this is currently a major hurricane. I believe this is right now a Category 3 and may briefly touch Category 4 status by the time we get to later on today. I'm just curious though. Let's take a look at some aircraft. Oh, there's no aircraft reconnaissance. It's out in the middle of the ocean. No wonder. But these systems are going to be, this system, I should say, is going to be moving west towards Hawaii. And that's the interesting thing, because right behind that, if we look here at the National Hurricane Center in the Eastern Pacific, we have Gilma, which is actually the middle storm. We have a third disturbance behind that, right towards the 15 north latitude region, just up to the west of Mexico. And then we have one in front of both of them that has a 90% chance of cyclone formation that is developing quite rapidly. So if we look here at some of the model guidance with these, we do see quite a bit of development towards Hawaii, or movement towards Hawaii. So we'll look here at the Central Pacific. And so this is what would be our first system that is right now right near 1,000 millibars, so just close to tropical storm status. That moves ever so close to Hawaii by the time we get to Sunday morning. Now, what's interesting about this system is that the cooler waters are above the 20th north latitude. So by the time you get north of Hawaii, you have a lot more cooler sea surface temperatures that are not supportive of tropical systems. Whereas if you go a little bit further south, I mean, you have the sea surface temperatures here do support some form of a tropical system. It certainly does not support, and this environment as a whole does not support a major hurricane impacting Hawaii. But what it does support is something at least of what could be near hurricane status moving just off the coast and ever so closely. That second system we talked about, this here would be Hurricane Gilma. That moves towards the west and then impacts Hawaii a second time. And then the third system has it moving way off to the north and then eventually just getting absolutely walloped by that high pressure to the north. So here's the thing. This is going to be a question for you guys. I don't know if this really impacts the energy nat gas space. I don't know to what degree it would. But we have seen, when we go back to the idea of infrastructure with wildfires, for example, Hawaii was way underprepared. There was a lot of things that went wrong with the Lahaina fires just about last year, a couple years ago. And I don't know much about their preparedness with tropical storms and hurricanes, but it's just some space to watch. I would definitely watch that space, keep a close eye on this. I know we don't have any impacts right now for the Atlantic at the moment, but let's not forget we also have Hawaii out here in the Central Pacific region. And so it's going to have a couple of tropical systems move through the region over these next few to several days. I'm mostly concerned about this system. If it stays to the south of the 20th latitude, I mean, this is really darn close to the Big Island. We'll have to keep a close eye on that and its tracking as we go through these next couple of days. But if you have interest in this system, I mean, I'm happy to continuously post update for you guys over these next couple of days as we head into Sunday. Like I said, I just don't know on the nat gas energy side if there's any significant impacts here or not. But I'll be sure to still keep posting for you guys with relation to the activity out in the Central Pacific. Meanwhile, though, in the Atlantic, it has been rather quiet. We have not seen much activity as of right now. That being said, one thing that I want to make you aware of is that we are seeing on the, what was it, the National Hurricane? No, it's not the National Hurricane Center. It is the Climate Prediction Center website. HDD. They are forecasting, in terms of probability, an uptick in activity. So take a look at this chart. This is a wonderful graphic that the Climate Prediction Center has begun doing. And this gives you a probability of tropical activity. This is between the 28th and September the 3rd. We see a very high probability of tropical development, greater than 60% in the Atlantic Basin, just to the east of the Lesser Antilles. We need to really watch that space. This has been an area that I've been telling you guys probably for the last week now, an area that we have to keep a close eye on for an uptick in activity. The same thing can be said about the Caribbean and the Gulf Coast. I know it's not painted yet, but we do see some rainfall and convective activity beginning to increase probabilities in that area. This region as a whole, we have to be mindful, can pick up at any time. We don't have any systems at the moment. There are no areas of concern right now. However, as we are coming off of Saharan dust season, as we are now moving in to the higher frequency, the peak of hurricane season, this is now the time that we have to really pay close attention to the activity. So we'll continue to monitor that, and we'll also have more detailed and extensive discussions on the Atlantic Basin here for our Saturday video. However, I'm not going to dive into that today. I just want to show you that from a probabilistic point of view, very high probability of tropical development in the Atlantic Basin, and even to some degree, some convective activity in the Caribbean between August 28th and the 3rd, and also going into the second week, or what would be the first week of September, the 4th through the 10th. So we got to keep a very close eye on that. These systems can develop at any time. Debbie's a great example of that, kind of developed out of the blue in an environment that really wasn't supportive up until it moved past the Lesser Antilles. So anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to post those in the Discord. You guys have been amazing in asking me questions. Tom, thank you for your question. I hope I answered it. If you need more clarity on that, feel free to let me know. But I think I addressed all of your points on that question. For you guys that have any questions about the maps that I'm outputting here, or any suggestions on the color table, feel free to post those in the Wxrogue Discord channel as well, and I'll be happy to answer your questions as I have been. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next weather discussion. Take care.